This story is not mine. The author will be in the description. I hope you enjoy. Midoriya stared at his feet and the ground that was now below them. He took notice of the two arms wrapped tightly around his waist, holding him back in case he would try again. But he did not resist. He stayed limply in the strong arms around him with the empty gaze on his face, although silent tears fell from his eyes. It was then he was carefully let down by the stranger behind him. He was going to be lectured again, right? He was going to be made fun of now, wasn't he? He was expecting it. But instead, this young wannabe hero stepped around him to try and stand a little bit in front of him. His eyes were narrow and hateful, although that hate was not for him. And somehow he knew that. Hey, what was that? The taller boy asked quietly. His tone was calm and soft, yet it was deep and mature even though they were about the same age. Midoriya was older than him, shockingly. He didn't receive an answer. Midoriya didn't even glance up at him as he continued to stare blankly at his bright red shoes. Todoroki, however, was not one to push. Instead, he reached for Midoriya's wrist and gave him a little tug to get him to follow. As they walked, Todoroki found his grip slip into the smaller boy's hand but he thought nothing of it. He led him to the door to a lower floor only to find it was locked from the inside. Inefficient, he grumbled. He looked around for possibly another door but there was none to be found and it was only beginning to rain harder. So instead he led the suicidal boy to a different ledge of the roof. "Think you can hold on to me?" he asked. Once again, he didn't receive an answer. But with his right hand, he placed it on the ledge to create a slide made completely of ice that would provide a safe departure to the ground. He took his hand back from Midoriya and instead put an arm around his waist to hold him close to make sure he didn't fall on accident of all things. Though he was a bit relieved to feel the freckled boy hold on his hoodie. In doing so, he noticed his hero flinched at the light grasp on his left shoulder. He's hurt. Making it down safely to the grass, Todoroki melted the ice to erase the trace of quirk use in public without a license. The taller boy did notice that the smaller didn't let go of him right away. He didn't let go of him at all. The rain was rather cold so it was likely the subtle warmth of his left side that he was clinging to. "Hey, you can," Todoroki began to say before the freckled boy finally said something with a very quiet voice. "You're hurt," he said so softly, almost too soft to even hear. "Don't leave yet," he pleaded while slowly letting go and going back into the school, though he was followed just in case he tried to jump out a window or something. Midoriya lifelessly wandered towards the school's infirmary. The doors were locked and that frustrated him, to the point where he kicked the door as hard as he could. This aggression, he wasn't usually like this. Taking a moment to regain slight composure, he took his yellow bag off his shoulders and put it on the ground. Going through it he found a safety pin and took off an all-night pin from his pencil bag, and with those, he got on one knee to try and pick the lock. When did he learn how to pick locks? He's seen it done in movies and cartoons, but how did he know how to? What was compelling enough to make him break into the school infirmary? This boy that prevented him from killing himself that has barely spoken to him was somehow motivating him to do this. Todoroki watched him curiously and then saw the door open. He followed the student inside and watched him start picking through drawers and cabinets looking for tools and basic medical things. "Why were you up there?" Todoroki attempted to ask again, but still kept his tone distant. "I finally saw reality. That everything I believed in was a lie." Midoriya opened up at last. He stopped rummaging through the nurse's things and just leaned against the cabinets while on his knees, his freckled cheek pressed against the cold wood. "The guy I looked up to more than anyone told me I could never be a hero without power. But he was a lie too. He's not a real hero either, and I know that things from a fake shouldn't matter but it's more complicated than that. I mean, how could a lie like him make such an impact on people? How can someone feel good lying to everyone who looks up to you? But he's not stupid so what he said is realistic." He didn't even hesitate to answer. It's like he didn't think about the answer at all. I mean, you don't need a quirk to be great, right? Quirkless people are just as good as people with quirks. But people with quirks seem to always forget how good they have it. And he caught himself amidst his typical muttering, though instead of detailed analysis, it was desperation to understand and accept what had happened this afternoon. But he was realizing that he was projecting a lot of anger and hatred all of a sudden. Midoriya wasn't used to being like this. And yet it didn't feel unnatural. However, he realized that he was talking to someone who used their quirk to help him off the roof of the building. Out of all people, he didn't want to offend the one who was listening to him right now. I'm sorry, I didn't mean. He suddenly realized his rudeness and tried to apologize, but Todoroki didn't seem all that mad. If anything, he took the hood off over his head so his face and hair could be seen better. All the hatred he projected was also cracking with sadness. He could see it. No, I get it. Heroes aren't really that great. And they can take their powers for granted. And power as in, not just their quirks. He said in a low tone, glaring at his left arm. Midoriya didn't quite understand what he was thinking, but he found his very presence to be soothing. Both of them were angry, but so sad at the same time. Midoriya took a closer look at the boy that had sat down in one of the chairs to watch him. It was only a few seconds longer when he at last found bandages and antibacterial creams. I mean, what kind of hero does this to someone who's supposed to be their son? Todoroki said bitterly with a dark look and unzipped his white hoodie to reveal his left hand, wrist, arm, shoulder, and part of his neck burned, blistered, and bloodied. He glared at the wounds, angry that he let this happen, but also that his father did it in the first place. And for the sake of their public image, it's not like the others are going to challenge him and call him out, he growled. Sometimes I think it would just be better if I was quirkless. I hate that I have one that's like his. Midoriya listened and shuffled over to try and clean up the blood and soothe the blisters and burns with ointments he found around and read the labels. I guess, heroes kinda suck, huh? He mumbled as a smile began to tug at his lips. Suddenly, he didn't feel as sad anymore. Talking with this red and white-haired boy was therapeutic, as someone who was quirkless and someone who hated their quirk both had similar distastes towards hero society. Yeah. But Todoroki wanted to be a hero, but why again? Was it to surpass All Might and his father? Why did he save this boy even though no one was watching? I want to be a hero. But the kind that just makes people feel better, at ease. And you don't need to rely on power for that all the time. To make people feel at ease. Protecting people from villains is important, but also saving people like Midoriya was just as important to him. Midoriya had begun to wrap up Todoroki's wrist and worked his way up to his shoulder carefully. You'll make a great hero, he said softly, without even thinking. Everything about this person he just met felt so genuine to him. There was no smile or blatant muscle. There was no monologue of morals or false promises of protection. He had human emotions. He found himself gazing at his scarred face for a few moments, maybe even a few moments too long. He looked so soft but so strong, blemished with a scar but still beautiful. Beautiful? He found himself blushing when he saw the bee-colored eyes make eye contact with him and went back to focusing on his arm. I think, even without a quirk, Todoroki began, looking down at this freckled boy. I think you can still make a big impact on people. On heroes too. It was then that there was another spark in a single moment. An impact. Impact. He could still make an impact. On heroes. Go past analyses. Go past studying. Go past note-taking. He glanced at his notebook that was on the tile floor. All those notes. All that work. Why? Why would that information need to stay on paper? He knows a ton about any public hero from news, from observations, from forums, wikis, logical analysis. Those notes, the hero's strengths that make them inspirational and cool? No, weaknesses. Weaknesses. Midoriya's lips trembled, but not from withheld sobs, it was laughter. So much light had come to his eyes. But not a light of innocent hope and cheer. The green in his irises nearly glowed with a minty light as a smile began twitching on his face. Why, you think so? Someone as strong as you? He asked, getting the bandages up to his shoulder. Todoroki simply nodded. Yeah. I do think so. His voice was so cool and collected. Did Midoriya love it? Maybe a little. but an impact. He wanted to make an impact on this boy too. He subtly wrapped his arms around Todoroki's neck and hugged him tightly and rested his chin on his shoulder. This boy, this hero, he saved him from killing himself. But he saved his future too. Thank you so much, he said with a big crooked smile and brightly glowing eyes. Todoroki was taken aback by the hug, surprised by it as he had not had one in such a long time. Never by someone his age either. It felt so foreign, but it would be a lie to say that he disliked it. He would have hugged back, but by the time he got one hand on Midoriya's back, the freckled boy had pulled away and put his hands on his shoulders. Hey, the hero who hurt you like this. You said it was your parent, your father? Asked the freckled boy, tilting his head to the side just a little bit. The hero that hurt his hero. Someone like that deserves to die, not me. Todoroki only nodded, a bit baffled by Midoriya's new expression. The boy who had nothing but an empty gaze now looked at him with a kind of enthusiasm, curiosity, and mischief he had never seen before. It didn't frighten him, he was just too unsocialized to understand. Who is he? Midoriya demanded. He'll get all the notes he can on him. He'll find every weakness. He'll make sure they get to an enemy, and he'll make sure to repay the beautiful boy in front of him for his kindness and for giving him a new reason to live. Endeavor, Todoroki answered, almost as if in a trance, allured by the glowing shade of the eyes in front of them. Such a cute, freckled face, but with such hypnotizing eyes, he had caught every fiber of his attention. Midoriya quickly let go and began to put away the things he had borrowed to patch up his hero and washed his hands. Before Todoroki could grab his hoodie, the smaller boy began rubbing detergent that he found on the fabric where the blood was stained. With a little bit of bleach and rubbing, the stain was hardly noticeable, even when inside out. Thank you for all of this, the taller boy was sure to say as they began to walk out together, but not without Midoriya stealing 2 books and shoving them into his bag while the other's back was turned. Thank you too for everything, he said with a small smile and his head lowered a bit. I should get home. My mom must be freaking out by now, he giggled a bit too. As the two walked out, they saw it was still raining. And before Midoriya took a step forward, he felt something being draped over his head. Here, you can have this. Todoroki gave his hoodie to Midoriya to at least keep him dry in the rain. But your bandages, Todoroki shook his head at even the beginning of a protest. No, don't worry. You can keep it. You've had a pretty shit day. And thus Midoriya would be seen walking back home, even going through the tunnel he had been attacked in earlier again. Todoroki's hoodie was a bit big on him from how much taller he was, but it was keeping him dry. But it was also so warm. The power to create ice and melt it. Number 2 hero Endeavor's son. Ice and fire. He nuzzled his nose near the zipper that was up as high as it could go. An amazing quirk, he mumbled. He wasn't made fun of or looked down on for being quirkless for once in his life. How lucky he had been to meet someone so kind. On a day as depressing and crushing as this, he was walking like a new person, all thanks to one boy who still wanted to be a hero. If only he knew that he just inspired one of the worst villains. Wait, Midoriya said to himself, stopping halfway through the tunnel. I don't even know his name. He cried out, gripping his hood and gritting his teeth in childish rage. I can't believe I never asked his name. I mean, I'll see him again, right? He looked down at his hands with a quivering smile. I have to see him again. I have to save him. He'll get his name eventually, surely. On coming back home, Midoriya was greeted with a tight hug from his mother, sobbing waterfalls and bombarded with questions as to why he was home so late, where the hoodie came from, why he was covered in bruises, and even more. Midoriya told only half-truths to let the events of that go under the rug and be left unknown to her. As far as she knew, he had a run-in with a villain while with some others and got a bit dirty, but someone lent him a hoodie to get through the rain and got distracted at a comic book store on his way home. There was no All Might or red and white-haired boy mentioned, and there was no mention of even getting close to a roof. He was still her quirkless little boy with innocent hopes and dreams. As school had taken a break for the semester, it left all the teenagers with plenty of free time. While many were training their quirks to apply and get into UA, others had to utilize other skills to be successful in the ever-changing society, and some were slacking around enjoying the leisure time they had. Midoriya would spend his afternoons and evenings at home, stuck on his computer scrounging every forum for information on any heroes. His notebooks had all been redone. What had been a fanboy's cherished series of encyclopedias was now a collection of hit lists. Of course, he could never use these notes personally. But it would only motivate him to go out and make connections with those who could. He would pretend to go to sleep at sundown, snuggling close to the white hoodie given to him by his only hero. But once it passed midnight, he threw on a black hoodie and pants with his favorite red shoes and went out in the city. Truly, it was not the safest idea for a quirkless teenager to go out at night to the sketchiest parts of the city, but he felt almost comforted by it. Purchasing some spray paint at an art store also provided him with plenty of entertainment. The atmosphere was altering what had been such a sweet boy into a small-time rule breaker, alienating himself from normal teenage society. Going out to the arcade or karaoke with friends was nowhere in his life. He had no friends. Striving to impress a girl he had a crush on, there was no girl in his life to admire. The only person his age he truly had positive relationships with was the boy that saved his life, and he didn't even know his name. He had no desire to partake in a part-time job. Just using his notes and getting revenge on the heroes that lied and hurt him was all he had to care about now. But sometimes focusing on one thing could get a bit boring, so he resulted in mild vandalism and sometimes even arson. Setting garbage or abandoned buildings on fire was a weekly thing, and spray painting anti-hero phrases on walls or even making amateur art was becoming a hobby. His note-taking was a top priority, however. Getting any dirt or information on All Might and Endeavor was his main focus above all else. His mother had found out about his sneaking out, but it appeared that he never came back hurt. And he always did come back, so maybe he just liked going for nightly walks. She never confronted him about it. One night, deep in the autumn season, brisk yet clear, Midoriya sat near a dumpster writing in a notebook and watching the phrase "heroes lie with All Might's hair shape" dry on the wall in front of him. He was drinking a soda casually and enjoying a typical night out. The page he was working on was that of Mount Levy. What had been complimenting notes were either erased or crossed out and rewritten with potential weak spots and personality flaws that could be used against her at any point. In the corner of each page was also a list of potential blackmail that could ever be used. He tapped his lip with his pen before flipping pages to find his sketch of Endeavor. He glared at it and darkened words he had already written. The characters of child abuse was bolded darkly again and again in the sections he kept for blackmail. "I'll save him," he whispered to himself. It's been weeks since he's tried to kill himself, but Todoroki was still fresh on his mind. "That's some pretty nice work you got there," another voice said from above Midoriya. The surprised viewer spooked the freckled boy and even made him jump as he looked up at the scrawny figure that stood over him. Bright red eyes stared down at him with a mess of blue hair barely framing the top half of his face. But he couldn't see his face because there was a severed hand over it. Was it real? Was it fake? He couldn't tell by how stiff and discolored it looked. This stranger, too, wore all black and red shoes, but they weren't high tops. And this man was older than him, but not by too much. Thanks. Midoriya stuttered. Something felt very odd about this new stranger, nothing like Todoroki. This new stranger sat down right next to Midoriya and looked over his shoulder, getting uncomfortably close for comfort. Was personal space just not a thing for him? Then Midoriya noticed the red eyes glance up at his tagged work on the wall in front of them. "Not a big hero fan, huh?" he asked with a cheery tone. He tilted his head to get an even better view of the notebook as the freckled boy flipped to a page that was more filled out than Endeavor's. Such aggressive penmanship, scratched out compliments, and entire pages had been ripped out only to be remade. "Looks like a hit list," the stranger commented before giggling and pointing at Midoriya mockingly. "Someone like you couldn't possibly take heroes like that on." Midoriya's face blushed with anger and embarrassment. Someone else making fun of him for being quirkless already? Yeah, and what can a twig like you? He was ready to snap back and stand up for himself for once when the stranger wrapped his arm around his shoulders and hugged him close to his shoulder. "Not yet," And not by yourself, the red-eyed stranger added with a promising tone, but it only made the boy freeze. But is someone like you really serious about this kind of thing? You really wanna see these guys die? The stranger then reached with his other hand to find the pages that were All Might's. Midoriya could see by just the shape of his eyes that he was smiling. Can a little schoolboy like you stomach something like that? Watching heroes die. It was this edgy teenager's new goal, wasn't it? To end Endeavor and All Might and other heroes that brag and boast blessed talent. Is that what he really wanted? This wasn't a game anymore, and it was becoming more than a dream. People were going to die and people were going to get killed. Midoriya could tell by the aura the man holding onto him was giving off. Has he killed people before? Will he kill him if he gives the wrong answer? He couldn't read his actions at all. His thoughts were but a mystery because he couldn't tell if this was a lie too. You don't have to answer right away, the stranger then said, having recognized the long silence between the two. He could tell he was making this boy think, and that was enough for him. I'm around. And you seem to be around too. The man then reached for the soda can that was on the ground beside Midoriya on the opposite side. He held it with his pinky finger up for some reason. Whatever you're thinking about and whatever those notes are about, we could make that happen. He waved the can around a bit in a circular motion. It was catching the attention of the silent freckled child. I hate lots of things, you know. I want to make everything I hate disappear. And I can make the things you hate disappear too. He then snickered as the can in hand turned to dust when his fifth finger touched it. He was casual to stand back up and stretch a bit. See you around, little schoolboy. He half waved, putting his hands in his hoodie pocket and walking off deeper down the alleyway. Midoriya was left quivering, wide-eyed, and at a loss of words. That man was so close. He was sitting right next to him, arm around him. He could have killed him right there if he wanted to. Decay, he stuttered quietly, gripping his neck just to feel that it was still there after being so close to death. His heart raced, beating out of his chest. His blood was pumping from the anxiety of the threat that was just there and now casually walking away. A man so scrawny, creepy looking, and yet shamelessly evil was right there in front of him. An enemy of heroes. He could only think of the pretty boy he met on that school roof, the only hero he wanted to save from a terrible pro-hero. It was his chance. It was his chance to save him. This little schoolboy began to smile. Wait. He called out, reaching out for the red-eyed stranger who stopped at his words. I'm quirkless. I don't have any power. I'm not strong or fast or flexible or anything like that. But what? Midoriya frantically flipped through a page in his notebook. The very last page that was sketched with the anatomy of a human that he had copied out of the books he stole from the school infirmary. It was labeled in detail with questions written all over the page about the human body and how quirks affect it. He held it up to this villainous stranger with a twitching smile on his freckled face. I want to learn. I want to know these heroes, inside and out. If I learn anything, I'll always let you know. I'll let you know any physical or social weakness. I can be useful somehow, right? Give him this chance. It's all he could ask for. And the stranger turned halfway to him, looking at the page from a distance and looking at the face of the trembling teenager. He merely scoffed and shrugged his shoulders. I'll see if I can figure something out for you eventually. And that's all he had left to say before leaving completely. Night after night, Midoriya went back to that specific spot hoping for the red-eyed stranger. But after the first week, it came to his attention that maybe he wanted to meet somewhere different in case he was being watched or followed. Someone like that has to have lots of enemies, right? That's the only explanation as to why he hadn't come back. Or maybe he was just busy, but surely he would have made the time to come back. That man didn't give up on him too, did he? Maybe he shouldn't have told him that he was quirkless. No, he definitely had to. Anything that came off as a lie or hiding something, someone like that would kill him in an instant. So the little schoolboy began tagging different walls around the city's underbelly with more of that same phrase he wrote that night. Heroes lie. It can at least be a sign that the teenager was still out and about. He wasn't hiding or running away from this opportunity. His desperation became so intense that he even began asking people in the alleys if they've seen someone in a black hoodie with a hand on his face. It was unwanted attention and unsafe, but he just had to find him again if he wanted to save Todoroki. It was just past the first week when he was leaving another signature tag on a small hero agency. Come on, how many of these do you need to find? He grumbled, getting annoyed at this point. He shook the can a bit, getting more pressure to build up when he felt someone grab the hood of his hoodie and lift him off his feet. He dropped the can in surprise and began kicking his feet. So you're the little brat that's been leaving those all over the place. It wasn't the one he was looking for. But even still, he was caught red-handed. If his mother found out about this, or if the schools he's applied to, or if the stranger figures out how pathetic he is at being a mild delinquent. Let me down. It was all he could say, even though it would do nothing. He was found out, deer in the headlights. Heroes lie, huh? That's a lot of disrespect from someone like you. The hero began to lecture and Midoriya just covered his ears and kept flailing to get out of this basic prose grip. He wasn't as big as All Might or Endeavor and his costume wasn't flashy at all. There was no way he was even in his entire collection of notebooks. He wasn't about to listen to anything this guy had to say. No more lectures. No more being told what he can't or shouldn't do. Shut up. He cried out, just not wanting to hear anything heroes had to say. Shut up. Shut up. He kicked back and nailed the heel of his shoe into his groin, making the hero flinch and grit his teeth. His grip loosened and Midoriya was on his feet once again. But it only took the second he landed for the hero to tackle him to the ground and forced his face into the dirt below them. Little kids like you try so hard to be different and say things just for attention. Slandering heroes like this, do you realize how hard they work to protect people like you and your friends? The hero continued. Midoriya still struggled, looking for any way to escape. His arms flailed, but he had no flexibility to try and hit the man on top of his back. But it was then that something shimmering caught his eye. A broken glass bottle in the shadow of a trash can was just an inch or two from his reach. Are you listening to me? Think about how immature you're being. Don't you think that we deserve a little respect for our hard work protecting you? Have we earned that much? This hero seemed personally offended by this freckled teenager's tagged words. But that meant nothing to him now. You people haven't earned jack from me. You don't even know me. The green-haired boy said through gritted teeth as his face was pressed further into the dirt. He just kept reaching for the light of that glass bottle. It seemed like such excessive force to be used against someone so small and quirkless. Having a flashy costume and a title doesn't mean anything. Being a hero doesn't mean you're the good guy. Midoriya tapped the top of the bottle to make it shift just a little bit until he could get the skinny end in his entire hand. People that think they deserve good things just because they are born with power need to disappear. With nothing but luck, the teenager closed his eyes and swung the bottle back and prayed that it would hit the hero. And it did. It hit the man on the forehead where he at least wore a helmet, but the shattered glass still was able to cut up and stab his face. What the hell? The hero once again had to back off and cover his face as a shard had gotten into one of his eyes. Midoriya scurried out from under him and picked up another chunk of glass that was on the ground and held it up in defense. Now he's done it. There's no getting out of this without trouble. The hero was on his knees holding his eye with blood dripping all over his face from smaller cuts. Look what you did. The man cried out, showing the freckled teenager his eye that had been slit by the glass with the piece still lodged inside of it. It made the teen flinch at the painful sight and fluids were dripping out of it. I didn't mean to. Not a chance. Instead, the corner of Midoriya's lips began to twitch up in a smirk. Look what this little quirkless boy did. The hero underestimated him and now he was half blind. He snuck up on him thinking he could take him on just because he was some hero. He began to giggle because the thought of it was hilarious. How terribly, horrifyingly ironic. Who needed a quirk to feel powerful? He brought a hero to his knees with the use of nothing but glass garbage. His giggle grew to a laugh as he just pointed at the bleeding hero with a bright glow in his green eyes. Look what I did. You can barely see. He mocked, finally being the one able to do that. His body was shaking with euphoria. This feeling was so new, so intoxicating. The hero was paralyzed by his shock of how this young teenager was so pleased by his suffering. How cruel someone was at such a young age. He reached forward with his arm quickly growing and extending, trying to grab the freckled boy yards away from him. It was his quirk. He just had to restrain this young lunatic in the making. Midoriya flinched and was about to turn to run before the hero's extended hand grabbed the back of his throat. It suddenly let go. He looked back to see a scrawny figure in black behind the hero, or at least, where the hero used to be. The man that had just been half blinded had suddenly turned to nothing but dust on the ground. Dead. The hero was dead. Gone in just a single moment. Midoriya hadn't even seen the man himself disappear, just the dust remains and a pool of blood from where he once knelt. He couldn't say anything, unable to find the words to say even though the one he's been looking for was right in front of him. The red-eyed stranger with the hand on his face walked right on through the puddle of blood to Midoriya while the boy was frozen before him. He strolled over to him, hunched over a bit to get to eye level, and got a little too close to his face again. "You good?" he asked vaguely. He only received a gulp and a nod as an answer. "Is he dead?" Midoriya asked very quietly, not breaking the little eye contact he had with the hues between the finger gaps. He just wanted to be sure. "Yeah," was all the hooded man said. After that, Midoriya broke eye contact to look at the blood again. So this guy was a murderer after all. Considering how easily and quickly he got rid of that hero, he's done this plenty of times before. It was difficult to fully process because of how quick the hero was gone, but Midoriya had such a sick pleasure of watching him be in pain. The man's eyes changed shape to represent he was smiling under that hand. "You still wanna do what you said?" he asked cheekily. "Learn heroes inside and out?" Midoriya nodded twice. The first time was slow and shaky, but after he shut his eyes tight his motion was more confident. "Then come on." Midoriya was lightly nudged on the shoulder to follow this random guy he met in an alley in the middle of the night and just killed someone. And as they walked, Midoriya was next to this man but a pace behind him. Where were they going? Was it going to be safe? Was anyone else going to be there? He had spent all time looking for this killer and now that he was with him, he felt himself getting nervous like the night they met. "Shigaraki Tomura. That's what you can call me. How about you, little schoolboy?" The hooded figure called Shigaraki finally revealed himself. "Midoriya Izuku." Did he forget his own name? He stuttered saying his own name. How embarrassing. He must look like a timid idiot. Shigaraki had been looking directly ahead until he asked for his new little acquaintance. He quickly noticed how nervous he was getting all of a sudden. He was a teenager growing up, he could tell that much. But this boy was clearly coming out of typical citizen life. He was walking into a life he's never seen or been a part of before. Did he feel bad for him? Maybe. Not pity or sympathy, but he felt something. This kid just looked pathetic to him. But he was willing to give this pathetic, stuttering boy a chance. This wasn't a mistake, right? Was he wrong to put faith in this random kid he met on the streets? He lightly scratched at his neck without thinking about it. Shigaraki took Midoriya to a building in the backmost streets of the most compressed part of the city. It was about 3 stories tall and looked pretty average on the outside. "Do you live here?" Midoriya asked as they were coming around to a side door. It was a bit hard to see with the lack of light in the area. Kinda. What could that possibly mean? Did he, or did he not live in this weird place in the middle of the city? Maybe he was just squatting here. He looked shaggy enough to live in a sketchy place like this. But in going through the door and having it shut lightly behind him, he found himself inside a bar with no one else except a man made of dark fog standing behind a counter. "I'm back, Kurogiri. It's the kid I was telling you about." Shigaraki grumbled, stretching his neck from side to side without cracking it. Midoriya looked around curiously trying to get a feel for the place. It was very neat with bottles behind the bar very neatly aligned, a big TV on a brick wall, lots of swivel stools to sit on, and a single red sofa against the wall. Not some big torture dungeon or decked out armory as he may have expected for a little bit. It just looked like a typical bar. The dark fog guy, named Kurogiri, was even dressed like a bartender, so he must just be the owner. What was up with this Shigaraki guy? What was he hoping to accomplish? Shigaraki took a seat at one of the stools at the bar. Get comfortable, he said, casually taking out his phone and just scrolling through it for a few seconds while Midoriya sat on the sofa in a stiff posture. What was he thinking? What was he planning? Was this a trap? There was so much he didn't know yet. This suddenly seemed like a bad idea. I'm trying to set something up here. I want to create a powerful team. Shigaraki began, glancing up at the freckled boy and then going back to look at his phone, his foot resting on his knee and his elbow on the counter. A League of Villains kind of thing. I want power. I want numbers too. But even then, a tight, well-crafted party would make for the greatest chance of success against our final boss. He showed his phone screen the boy who was listening intently. He showed him a picture of All Might in his fake form in a news article. I want to destroy Hero Society. But I want to destroy All Might more than anything. And you're going to help me do that. That's what you want to, right? To destroy Hero Society? What was that even supposed to mean? Shigaraki was so vague, it just left Midoriya with even more questions. And yet he felt that they were things that could be answered with time. It was only a matter of whether he was going to give Shigaraki and this Kurogiri guy his time and limited skills. He didn't have that much to offer them, right? But it seemed he was the first to be invited to this well-crafted party. This was a whole new world he was jumping into. He wouldn't be able to live like the rest of the kids he went to school with anymore if he was going to team up with this murderer. And yet, all he could think about was All Might's lies and then Todoroki. The thought of seeing that beautifully kind boy, ensnared and trapped by his father's shadow and getting caught up in a world of lies and arrogance, it filled him with a sense of rage. I do want that, he said as his posture loosened and his head lowered to look up, yet straight at Shigaraki. I want to destroy someone other than All Might, but I want him gone too. Don't get me wrong. He wanted that monster of a liar out of the public eye so people don't get their hopes up like fools as he did. But there's someone I want dead. The number 2 hero below him. I'll do anything if you can promise me they'll both disappear. He'll save Todoroki. He'll save him no matter what. He owes him nothing short of his own life and his future. Shigaraki smiled at Midoriya's conditions. Of course, he hummed, standing up again and going to an elevator door. Let me show you what you'll be doing now, little schoolboy. Midoriya went ahead and followed Shigaraki once more with much more pride in his step. He'll become something now. He'll be more than just that quirkless kid. He felt the elevator descend quite a bit, understanding that this building was far bigger than he thought. There were many more basement floors than upper ones. And when those doors opened again, Shigaraki stepped out first and turned on a light switch to show him his new purpose. Midoriya stepped through the threshold and beheld the sight that no one his age should be offered. A laboratories, supplied with surgical tools, drugs, books, torturous equipment, cages big enough to fit people in, workbenches, and 3 tables to fit and restrain people. This was a setup for human experimentation. Learning heroes inside and out. Quirkless or not, whatever you can learn and study will be of use to me. Shigaraki said, walking further in, going through a drawer, and placing a scalpel in Midoriya's hand that he grabbed and brought outward to hold it. Still holding onto his hand, he bent over to get to his eye level. Midoriya Izuku, will you truly become a villain? He asked with the most twisted smirk underneath that hand. He was completely still but his mind was ravaged with enthusiasm. A doctor. A healer. But also a killer. It's exactly what he needed. And with a bright green glow in his big mischievous eyes, Midoriya tilted his head up to look down at the man before him. Absolutely, Shigaraki Tomura. I very much hope you enjoyed. Reminder that the art and story are not mine. I got the art off Google and the author along with the link to the story is in the description. As a reminder, I will be posting every day till the end of summer and will be posting my own original universe story come fall. I hope you stick around for that, and as the meme gods always say, be gay and do crime. Storyteller signing off.